Look at this true shooting percentage, dude. 50% true shooting for his entire playoff career, and he has multiple years in the 40s. That's really, really, really bad. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Also Rusty Buckets. If you're over on YouTube, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and drop a like. It helps the video do much better in the YouTube algorithm, so it's much appreciated. And go ahead and check us out over on Spotify if you want this as an audio-only experience. Also, if you are someone who has enjoyed my League or my GM content in the past, I'm going to be doing episodes of that over on the old 2K channel that are cut downs of VODs, and I'm obviously going to be live streaming. So if you want to check that out, that link will be in the description as well. You know what it is. We're back with Hot Take Tuesdays, and our first take from Nana Ya. Hot take: Kyrie Irving was the best shooting guard in the NBA last season. He averaged pretty much the same stats as Ant as a second option and shot 50, 40, 90. I understand where this take is coming from. I just disagree. Like, yeah, you can definitely make the argument that, like, the stats are there. I don't think that's wrong, but just, like, from an eye test and a visual standpoint, Ant, Donovan Mitchell, and Booker are all players who are just, like, a level above. And you say that, like, put up the same stats as Ant as a second option. Well, there is a lot of benefit to being a second option. Doing something like shooting 50, 40, 90 is heavily predicated on having another option out there. And not that Kyrie was necessarily inefficient at times where he has been the one option, but we know that it hasn't necessarily been the best situation. If you want to say that Kyrie is better as a secondary player than either of those guys are as a secondary, then I agree with that. But as a primary lead shot creator, lead ball handler, I actually would take all three of those guys over Kyrie Irving. Kyrie is really crafty with the ball, but I think a lot of people confuse that with him just being like next level great at generating good looks. He's not. He gets enough space for his own shots, and he gets a lot of his offense off of the ball, playing off of Luka Doncic, in the past playing off of LeBron James. It's not just like a crossover into a pull-up all the time. Yeah, I think people overrate that a little bit. Also not the playmaker that really either of those guys are. If you want to see me rank more shooting guards, the last podcast episode, me and the boys at the Shoot Around discussed it, made a tier list, so you can check that out. Small forward list tomorrow. This is a reaction to another take from this video from JM. The Jayson Tatum part is simple. He isn't a superstar, he is a star. He is awesome, but he is not on the tier with Giannis, Luka, Jokic. Luka on that Celtics team destroys the league. Tatum on this Mavs team wouldn't have made the finals. So yeah, while Tatum himself is not on that level, his team absolutely is. Brad Stevens put together an insane team that doesn't require the absolute toppest tier talent to win. Also, Tatum is still very young. Dude is not even at his peak yet, so he may reach that level, which is scary for sure. For me, Tatum has been someone who has been bordering on the superstar conversation, but I kind of came to the conclusion that he was a superstar purely based on the fact that he managed to be super impactful without scoring the ball. So I realize scoring is the first thing that you look at with just about any NBA player, especially a lead franchise option. And Jayson didn't do a good job of that in the conference finals or the finals. And that's not exactly the right time to be not scoring the ball well. But that said, his ability to switch on to centers and his playmaking downhill made a huge difference for this team down the stretch of both of those series. I mean, the first series was super easy, but I guess the second one was pretty easy too. I think he managed to have a superstar level impact as much as you can without scoring the ball. And to me, that's where I was like, yeah, I am going to put him more firmly in that category. But I do think it's fair to be like, he's definitely not on the same tier as Giannis, Luka, or Jokic. There is levels to it. I think Tatum is one of the worst superstars in the NBA, but that still makes him a superstar. And worst obviously has a negative association, but being the worst superstar means you're still like a top 10 player. My definition of a superstar is player who I think can be the best player on a championship team, a true mega talent, and I think Jayson is on that tier. I also feel as though the team that he's on gives you the impression that he's actually a little bit worse than he is, because he doesn't necessarily have as crazy a stats as Giannis, Luka, or Jokic do, because he's not as entirely integral to their success. He is integral to their success, but he's not the end-all, be-all, and that's the difference between him, Giannis, Luka, Jokic. And I don't think Tatum can be the end-all, be-all type of superstar, but a superstar nonetheless, in my opinion. Jamal Crawford is nowhere near the greatest sixth man of all time like most people claim. Sure, his highlights are dazzling, but when it comes to winning, he is far from it and was so inefficient most of the time. If he can't score, then he doesn't impact the game positively. Manu, Hondo, and Mikhail take the top 3 spots, while Michael Cooper is the 4th greatest sixth man of all time. He even won DPOY as a sixth man. Looking back at it, I do not understand how Michael Cooper won that Defensive Player of the Year. It was very early in the awards inception, so that probably played a part in it, but the fact that he got that as a sixth man guard is pretty ridiculous. I'm sorry, Michael Cooper was a very good defender, but there is simply no way that he was the best defender in the NBA that season. He just happened to play for the Lakers, and especially at that time, we were super Laker focused. I don't know if Michael Cooper would be my pick. That top 3 is probably pretty accurate. Hondo is John Havlicek, for those who do not know, and he was a sixth man for the 60s Celtics for multiple titles, averaging 20-plus points per game off of the bench. He actually went on to be like a 27-7-7 guy for this team, for the Celtics in the 70s, and won a championship that way as well. Yeah, Jamal Crawford isn't the greatest sixth man of all time, and I think it's fucking incredibly dumb that anyone would think that he is. Because while I understand that if you watch a highlight tape of Jamal Crawford, you will see amazing shit. You will see a guy who looks like a fucking superstar with how incredible some of these moves are. But the reality is super inefficient, especially in the postseason. Jamal Crawford, for his career in the playoffs, shoots 38.6% from the field, 43% on two-pointers, and 30.7% on high-volume three-point shooting. Negative box plus minus for his entire playoff career. Guy was was like a big reason that they would get significant. Look at this true shooting percentage, dude. 50% true shooting for his entire playoff career, and he has multiple years in the 40s. That's really, really, really bad, and for me, if you don't play well in the playoffs, then I just do not consider you to be all that good. I think you can be a good regular season player, but that's about it. And I mean, his efficiency for his career at large isn't amazing either. He's at 45% from the field, 45% from 2, 41% from the field, and 35% from 3. But it gets worse in the playoffs. I don't even think Jamal was a really good player. Like, he was incredibly good aesthetics, incredibly good vibes, but there is a lot more to that, and the truth is, dude just wasn't that good. Hot take from Beast Dude 27. Just because a player can make a shot doesn't mean it's not a bad shot. Yeah, the quintessential example of this is, of course, Damian Lillard hitting the 3 over Paul George that he did. I agree with Paul George. It is a bad shot. Damian Lillard is capable of hitting that shot, but I think in that context, that was just like the most giant pair of balls ever. But the reality is that shot doesn't go in 9 times out of 10. We luckily just got the good timeline on that one. There are players you would rather take shots than that if you have to have someone take shots like that. But I do think that there are plenty of players capable of making a difficult shot, but they lean too far into difficult shots because they're capable of making them. I actually felt like that was a big issue with the Clippers early on into the Paul George PG era, because they were so reliant on tough jumpers going in, and I felt like the offense would kind of fall apart because they didn't have a real system and they didn't have real options for easy offense. In general, the best of the best players, rarely are they even taking bad shots. I feel like that isn't too much of a problem. Ironically, I think Jayson Tatum is one of those guys who will regularly take a bad shot here or there. But yeah, in general, Just because you can make it doesn't mean it's a good shot. That's definitely correct. From Rick Harrison, hot take, the box score is outdated. There are so many things that happen on a basketball court that should be considered in the box score. Screen assists, shot defended, and field goal percentage on said shots, touches, total time possession of the ball, turnovers forced, deflections, etc. Also, per game stats are extremely overrated and per possession stats are more nuanced. I don't think I agree with this. And here's why. That shit, screen assist, shot defended, field goal percentage on shots, time of possession, that stuff is for dorks. Like, that stuff is for nerds like you and me who like those kind of stats and want to see that more nuanced information. But the reality is most casual fans are going to consume box score stats, and they really would have no interest in looking at that kind of stuff. They're like, look, how many points did this guy get? How many rebounds did this guy get? How many assists? How many steals? How many blocks? How efficient was he? It makes sense that that is primarily the thing that someone who's more casual would watch. Naturally, these box scores are going to be predicated towards more casual viewers. You know, we tend to call casual viewers box score watchers, but I don't think that makes the box score outdated. The more advanced stats should just be accessible, and for the most part they are. So if you want to know that stuff, you can. I think the only people who really care about those stats are people who would already go out of their way to get to it anyways. From Saturns, Damian Lillard, I think you meant Lillard, is a very overrated playoff performer. Besides a few games, he has massively underperformed in the playoffs. I don't know that I would say besides a few games. He's had some good series here and there, but Dame has had maybe not quite as many bad series as he has had good series, but he's had a lot of fucking bad series. When they played the Warriors in the conference finals, the one time they made it, CJ McCollum was the best player in that series. They had that series against the New Orleans Pelicans where he played awful and like Drew Holiday just owned him from the start of the series to the end of it. But he also has that OKC series, and holy shit, what a series that was. He had like a 50-plus point game in the bubble in the playoffs against the Los Angeles Lakers. Overrated? Yeah, I do agree he's an overrated playoff performer. I wouldn't say that he's underperformed more than he has either met his level or outperformed it. So, I agree, not fully. From Liam Mizzou, I don't know. There is zero argument for Kawhi not being the greatest Raptor of all time. For anyone who says he can't because he only played one season, Kawhi accomplished more in that season than Kyle Lowry or DeMar or Carter did for their careers. I don't care how many All-Star or All-NBA appearances they had. If one man is primarily responsible for your franchise's only championship, he is your team's GOAT. That's interesting. I don't know if I agree, but I do understand where you're coming from, and I have had a perspective at least adjacent to this before. I don't know if I outright would say zero argument. Being the franchise GOAT doesn't necessarily equate to just pure titles. Obviously, Dwayne Wade won a title in 2006, but the next two championships in his resume, LeBron was the best player on that team. Nobody's calling LeBron the greatest Heat player of all time. It's definitely not a conversation there. The impact a player has on a franchise, if it's over a stretch of time, can be more impactful than an NBA championship can be. I do understand that the championship is the most important thing, and I agree with that, and I agree that that's the first and foremost thing you look at for your franchise GOAT is like, well, what did this guy do in terms of actually putting banners up? But Kyle Lowry and DeMar played a really long time in Toronto. They were multiple-time All-Stars. And Vince Carter essentially put the Toronto Raptors on the map. He was like the icon that made Toronto basketball relevant. And that is huge. He represents the image of the Raptors quite a bit. That said, I don't think this is wrong. I don't think there's a super great answer for that question otherwise anyways, but reasonable enough. From Nicola Yassi, hot take: with the new CBA limits on payroll, players that are good scorers but have limited other skills, Jordan Poole, Cam Thomas, Jordan Clarkson, etc., are luxuries that you should seldom pay. These guys still have a place in the league as cheap bench guys or potential draft guys, but similar to NFL running backs, you never want to be the team that gives them their second contract. I don't know if it's about second contract, and I think in the case of Jordan Clarkson, that scaled down to where his pay is fine, although he's actually not that great at scoring. His efficiency is fucking abysmal. But Jordan Poole and Cam Thomas, I agree. I think they are in a similar vein as like Zach LaVine, and you guys probably know how I feel about Zach LaVine, and if you don't, I think that being just a scorer, as important as scoring is, you just aren't going to be a great player, and you just shouldn't be paid that much if you're just a scorer. If your playmaking leaves a lot of room to be desired, and your defense is bad as it is with Jordan and Cam, then you're gonna end up not being that impactful. A lot of it is about being a guard. Like Lauri Markkanen, for example, is someone who isn't a great defender or a great rebounder or a great playmaker. He's better at all of those things, and I think Jordan Poole and Cam Thomas are. But he is an off-ball offensive player. He isn't dribbling the ball a lot like Jordan Poole and Cam Thomas are. And if you have one of your lead ball handlers being someone who does not make the right decision with the ball in their hands, doesn't find open teammates all the time, even rarely in some cases, always looking for their shot, that player is just not that good. There is really not any player in the NBA, especially towards the top of the league and especially towards the top of payrolls, that is only good at scoring the ball. That's just not something that the NBA really does anymore. I think that was something that existed a little bit more in the past, but so many players can score the ball now that any NBA team can get a scorer that is overall a better player than Cam Thomas and Jordan Poole. They just can. So why bother with them when you could get a more well-rounded player for basically the same amount of money, or maybe a little bit more, but it's worth it because that player is more well-rounded? Yeah, so for me, the archetype of player who will forever be overrated is Jordan Poole and Cam Thomas. I feel similarly about Jamal Crawford. That's why I think he's overrated, is like, yeah, dude who only scores, bad defender, not great a playmaker. That guy's not actually that good. They just do the thing that we talk about in the sport the most. And yeah, primarily the game's about buckets. But if you can find a guy who can get a bucket just as well and then do other things, you should choose that player over Jordan Poole and Cam Thomas. And if you are locking yourself into those guys being integral parts of your franchise, I don't know if you're going to go too far. From Scum 3x270, Jimmy Butler gets way too much discredit for not having a ring. The Heat were not favorites in any of their finals matchups, going in as a 5 and 8 seed. People seem to forget/overlook Bam and Dragic being injured in the 2020 bubble finals as well. He doesn't deserve to be disrespected as much for all he has accomplished in the playoffs, simply because he never reached the unrealistic peak of 2 Cinderella runs. I get what you're saying, and I think history will remember Jimmy Butler more positively than the general perception of him is right now, because those finals runs are ultimately super impressive. I think Jimmy gets a little bit too much credit for them getting there. You mentioned Bam and Dragic. They were super integral to them getting to the spot where they did. Jimmy Butler turned into God a couple of times, but that wasn't a universal truth across the playoffs. They've managed to get into the finals after having series where Jimmy Butler was just okay. That said, I think Jimmy Butler rubs a lot of people the wrong way. I think his attitude rubs a lot of people the wrong way. I don't get the impression that I'm kind of tired of the guy who turns it on in the playoffs, because we've seen that doesn't always happen. Didn't happen with Jimmy last year. Didn't happen with Jamal Murray last year. So I don't really like when people do that anymore. I get not going full speed 100% during the regular season. It makes sense to do something like that. But the degree in which they turn it down is just annoying to me. And it also makes it extremely difficult to rank those players. I mean, it's extremely difficult to rank Jimmy Butler. You will see him on people's top 50 lists anywhere from like 8 to 20. So for that reason, I understand where the discredit comes from. It's a vibes thing, but history will kind of forget that stuff, and it will just remember that they made the playoffs, or they made the finals with him as with the Heat as the 5 and 8 seed, with him as the best player. That's a pretty good legacy. Obviously, you'd rather win a championship than not, but that's about as close to the next best thing as it gets. From Liam Mezu. Stephen Curry is arguably the second greatest playmaker of all time behind Magic Johnson. Playmaking, by definition, means creating opportunities for your teammates, whether it be through passing or off-ball movement or scoring or anything else. Thus, Steph is better at making plays than almost anybody ever. Which, side note, when people say Steph isn't a point guard because he's not a playmaker, they're stupid. He's just not a pass-first playmaker. I understand where you're coming from. I do think there is a couple of guys I would consider better playmakers than Steph, but I would probably have him top 5 and definitely top 10. I get what you're coming from, and obviously that had a lot to do with the Warriors being as good as they were, but it's very difficult to quantify. It's very difficult to follow. Like, it requires paying attention to a lot of nuances of the sport, and a lot of people are just watching whoever has the ball, which makes sense. Just a pro tip, if you want to actually feel like you want to learn more about how the game actually works, try watching a player without the ball in their hands, whoever you may choose, and see what that looks like, because it's not being so focused on the ball handler can make you not realize a lot of the nuances of off-ball stuff. Steph, those nuances are harder to understand, so I get why people miss it. But I agree, Steph is an all-time great playmaker. I just wouldn't say second, I don't think, but I get where you're coming from. From Patrick05 Morgan, hot take, Paul George has the best handle and three-point shot of any small forward of all time, and he never gets acknowledged for it. I think he has the best three-point shot of any small forward, or at least any star small forward. I feel like there might be a off-ball shooter who's like Glenn Rice or some shit. I don't fucking know. I'm not looking into it right now, but I'm willing to go with that. I think I've said before that Paul George might be the best three-point shooter over 6'8" in NBA history, because there's actually not a lot of guys who can compare to peak Paul George three-point numbers who are that tall. Generally, your better shooters are in your like point guard, shooting guard height range. Handles wise, though, I don't think I agree. I understand this is another aesthetic thing, and Paul George is the king of aesthetics, so I get it. But his handle, like, Paul never quite became a top like 5, maybe even not even a top 10 shot creator in the NBA, because I don't feel like he gets too much separation with his handle. It's very pretty, but there's a difference between it looking pretty versus it being functional, and the function ain't really there, so not to the degree that it is pretty, you know. I'd probably say Kevin Durant has better handles than Paul George. I'd probably say LeBron has better handles than Paul George. LeBron has a really functional handle that's not flashy. Obviously, the guy has crossovers and shit throughout his career because he's played too long not to have a long compilation of that. But generally speaking, LeBron is not like trying to and one mixtape dudes. Like, he is using functional, easy moves, taking advantage of his size, and he's like, yeah, all I need is a handle that can't be stripped easily, and as long as that's the case, I can just barrel my way to the rim over and over. So that's exactly what he does. So no, I don't agree best handle. Best three-point shot, probably true. And if you say Larry Bird, shut the fuck up. He shot 2 of them a game. I don't care if he could have shot more in the modern NBA. He didn't, so he's not. From Pack Sugar. NBA fans consume the NBA like it's an elaborate soap opera, and it's very annoying. Like, can we talk about the actual basketball? Yes and no. I think there is plenty of actual basketball discussion that you can find anywhere, but there is kind of a soap opera aspect to this. There is objectively, like, the NBA, and this is probably with athletes at large, but I do feel like you get it more in the NBA. Maybe it's because of the frequency of games or whatever, but most NBA players are a level of arrogant. A lot of them are really petty, and they're all, for the most part, super competitive, and a lot of them really care about their money. So naturally, conflict arises. There will be all kinds of juicy stories that have come from the NBA in the past and will continue to come in the future. And to me, the storytelling of the sport is what I love about it the most. There is more to it than that. The game itself is also super interesting. The sport itself is super interesting. I've played it my entire life. Not all that great, but I do enjoy the hell out of actual basketball. But I am perfectly okay with people who want to consume the game through narratives and shit, just as long as there's an understanding of when an actual basketball conversation is happening versus when we're having a elaborate soap opera discussion. I understand how that could be annoying, but the reality is if you curate your stuff, if you find the right people, you can definitely find plenty of people who will just talk about the basketball. It is more mainstream to talk about the narrative stuff, but I think that's true across the board. Like, if it bleeds, it leads. Whatever the most dramatic story is what's going to get the most attention. It's just kind of the nature of how this works, and I personally have no beef with it. I don't think I would have come to love the NBA if I did, because it is such a heavy part of it. This will be the last one here from the Bronx 4771. Nobody will ever reach the heights of LeBron or Jordan when it comes to the face of the NBA and accolades. The MVP voting is too inconsistent, and with reigning champions not being able to make it past the second round since 2019, that will guarantee that. Yeah, that's something that I am interested in going forward. Who, like, probably the last NBA, not even probably, the last NBA player to rack up 4+ championships, 2+ MVPs, was Stephen Curry. Jokic has gotten a lot of MVPs, but they lost in the second round of the Timberwolves, as you mentioned. Won 1 championship, got 1 finals MVPs, but the prospect of racking up 6 titles, 5 MVPs, multiple scoring titles. Technically, that's never been done by anybody to that extent, but I think LeBron has 4 MVPs, 1 less MVP than Jordan, 2 less championships. Kobe got 5 championships and an MVP. But as you mentioned, I think the MVP debate, I think the fact that Jokic did not win it in his the year in between, when he won 2 and then didn't and then won 1, I felt like he should have won it that year and then shouldn't have won it the last year. So it feels like the MVP discussion is just not quite as cut and dry as it used to be. I think in general things aren't as cut and dry as they used to be, and that's just how it goes when we're in a social media era. You hear everyone's opinion now. Everyone has a forum to express themselves that didn't exist before, so pretty much across the board, voting and stuff was more streamlined and more universal and easier to get a lot of people on the same page. And with championships in recent years, I think 3-point shooting is another part of this, because shooting variance can determine playoff series. Like, that's what I was saying about Jimmy Butler earlier, about him being over-credited at times for their success. Like, they had series where they just shot the piss out of the ball, and that's why they won, not because Jimmy Butler went God mode. Like, where they shot like 60% from 3 for the entire fucking series. Like, some shit like that. That wasn't really something you had to worry about. There was less variability when everybody is shooting 2-pointers pretty much exclusively. And I think paying these role players is becoming more difficult. The addition of the second apron makes bringing back championship rosters more difficult. And we haven't seen a repeat champion since 2019 because of that. Yeah, I agree. I think we're going to have to change how we evaluate the players we have going forward into the GOAT debate, because it might just be impossible to get a resume like Jordan and LeBron did because of the landscape of the NBA. That's just the way it is. So I hope people would be able to take that into context. A lot of people are just going to go 6 rings, 6 for 6 in the finals. Can't argue with it. You can, though, and the landscape of the NBA at the time determines a lot of what happens. and Jordan was in a good time to rack up those type of titles. Now, not a good time. So Luka Doncic, Victor Wembanyama, don't be surprised if they retire with 1 to 3 championships and not 4 to 7. That's it. Shout out to Nick for editing this video. We'll be back with Hot Takes Tuesdays on Friday. Go check out my live stream or my 2K channel for the new episodes of That My League, and that'll be it. Goodbye.